The silence in the grand salon of Ravenmore House was suffocating, the kind that pressed against the walls and made every breath feel like an intrusion. Coralie Whitmore stood in the shadow of a marble pillar, her fingers clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She was not supposed to be noticed. That was the entire point of her existence in this room. To be invisible, forgettable, a ghost in serviceable gray wool, while the silk-draped peacocks paraded before the Duke. 10 of them. 10 noble daughters from 10 impeccable families, each presented with elaborate ceremony over the past 3 hours. Each dismissed with a single word. No. The word fell from the Duke's lips like a stone dropping into still water, rippling outward through the assembled society matrons who clutched their fans and whispered behind gloved hands. The rejection was absolute, delivered without explanation or apology, and yet somehow more devastating for its brevity. Lady Narcissa Pemberton, Coralie's employer, had been the 7th rejection. She'd swept from the room with her chin high and her eyes murderous, dragging her mother, Lady Hortense, behind her like a ship hauling anchor. Coralie should have followed. Protocol demanded it. But Lady Hortense had hissed at her to stay, to watch, to report back every humiliating detail of the remaining candidates' failures. So Coralie stayed, pressing herself against the cold marble, trying to disappear into the wallpaper. She'd become expert at this over 3 years of paid companionship, the art of existing without being seen, of occupying space without claiming it. The 10th lady, a trembling girl of perhaps 17 in rose-colored satin, received her dismissal with a choked sob. Her mother gathered her up and swept toward the doors, shooting a look of pure venom at the Duke that should have turned him to ash where he stood. He didn't flinch. Crispin Ashworth, Duke of Ravenmore, stood at the center of his own destruction, with the stillness of a man who had stopped caring about consequences. He was tall, lean, and sharp-featured in a way that suggested sleepless nights and thoughts too heavy to carry. Dark hair fell across a forehead creased with exhaustion. His eyes, gray as winter storms, surveyed the wreckage of his grandmother's carefully orchestrated bride parade with absolute indifference. The Dowager Duchess Augusta rose from her throne-like chair, her face a mask of controlled fury that Coralie recognized from years of observing society's most formidable women. Crispin. Her voice could have frozen the Thames. You have rejected every suitable candidate I have presented, every daughter of every great house who would have been honored to bear your name. What precisely do you want? The room held its breath. The Duke's gaze moved slowly across the assembled witnesses, the matrons, the remaining servants, the scandalized lords who'd accompanied their wives to witness the spectacle. His expression remained utterly blank, as if he were cataloging specimens rather than observing fellow human beings. Then his eyes stopped. On her. Coralie felt the weight of his attention like a physical blow. She pressed harder against the pillar, her pulse stuttering against her throat. No. He wasn't looking at her. He couldn't be. She was nobody. Nothing. A paid companion in a borrowed dress that had been mended twice at the seams. The fabric was serviceable gray wool, chosen specifically to render her invisible among the silks and satins. But his gaze didn't move. That one, the Duke said, his voice carrying across the silent room with terrible clarity. Give me the one they overlooked. Chaos erupted. The Dowager's fan clattered to the floor. Someone gasped, or perhaps everyone gasped simultaneously, creating a chorus of feminine horror. Coralie heard her own name being whispered, passed from mouth to mouth, like a disease spreading through the assembled company. The companion. Lady Hortense's voice rose above the din, shrill with outrage. You cannot be serious. She's nobody. She's a servant. I am entirely serious." The Duke moved then, cutting through the crowd with the ease of a blade through silk. People parted before him instinctively, clearing a path to the marble pillar where Coralie stood frozen, her mind screaming at her legs to run while her body refused to obey. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way exhaustion had carved lines around his mouth that hadn't been there in the portraits that hung throughout the house. Close enough to smell cedar and sandalwood, scents that seemed to belong to another world entirely. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and she had no idea how he knew her name. "I believe we need to talk." The words hung between them like a blade waiting to fall. Coralie's tongue felt thick, useless. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Around them, the whispers had grown to a roar, scandal spreading through the room like wildfire through dry timber. She could feel the eyes of every person present boring into her back, assessing, judging, condemning. "This is preposterous." Lady Hortense Pemberton pushed forward, her considerable bulk wrapped in violet silk that strained at the seams. "Your Grace, I must protest. This woman is in my employ. She is a companion to my daughter, nothing more. You cannot simply—" "I can." The Duke didn't look at Lady Pemberton. His eyes remained fixed on Coralie with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "I am the Duke of Ravenmore. I can do precisely as I please." "Crispin," the Dowager's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. "A word. Privately. Now." For a long moment he didn't move. Then, without breaking eye contact with Coralie, he spoke in a tone that suggested the matter was already decided. "Miss Whitmore will wait in the library. Someone will escort her there immediately." A servant appeared at Coralie's elbow, materialized from thin air, as servants in great houses seem to do, and she found herself being guided away from the pillar, away from the furious crowd, through a door she hadn't noticed into a corridor that stretched before her like an escape route, or a trap. The library was enormous, 2 stories of leather-bound volumes rising toward a painted ceiling where gods and goddesses cavorted among clouds. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast an ox, casting dancing shadows across oriental carpets that felt impossibly soft beneath her worn boots. The scent of old paper and polished wood wrapped around Coralie like a blanket, familiar and strange all at once. She moved to the nearest shelf instinctively, her eyes scanning the spines. Aristotle, Plato, Herodotus, a complete set of Shakespeare in matching burgundy leather. Milton, Donne, a surprisingly worn copy of Wollstonecraft that made her eyebrows rise. Someone in this household was reading philosophy that most society families considered dangerously radical. "You're doing it again." She spun around, her hand pressed to her chest. The Duke stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light from the corridor. He'd entered without sound, a skill that seemed deliberate rather than accidental. "Doing what?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Reading." He moved into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded far too final. "You've been doing it all afternoon, during the presentations, while every other person in that room watched the parade of potential duchesses. You were reading the spines of my books." Heat flooded Coralie's face. "I didn't mean to. It's why I noticed you." He crossed to a sideboard, poured 2 glasses of something amber, and held one toward her. 10 weeks, 10 interviews, 10 women who couldn't look at me without calculating my worth per annum. But you— a shadow crossed his features, something almost like wonder beneath the exhaustion. "You were more interested in whether I owned a first edition of Montaigne." Coralie didn't take the glass. "I don't understand what's happening here, Your Grace, if this is some sort of jest." "I don't jest." He set the rejected glass down on a table, took a long swallow from his own. I also don't have time for elaborate explanations. My grandmother will be here within 10 minutes, and before she arrives, I need to know if you're intelligent enough to understand an opportunity when it's placed before you. An opportunity? The word tasted bitter on her tongue. To be humiliated publicly? To be dismissed from my position with Lady Pemberton? Because I assure you, Your Grace, that's exactly what will happen. Lady Narcissa was already furious about her own rejection. Now that she gestured helplessly, unable to find words adequate to describe the catastrophe. Whatever you've done, I'll be blamed for it. I'll be ruined. The Duke's expression didn't change, but recognition passed through his gaze. An acknowledgement that he understood exactly what he'd done to her life. You won't be ruined. You'll be elevated. Elevated to what? Your Grace, I'm a paid companion. My father was a scholar who lost his position when his health failed. My mother takes in mending to help make ends meet. I have no fortune, no connections, no pretense. He cut her off, his voice sharp with something that might have been relief. No simpering, no calculation, no desperate eagerness to secure a title. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how exhausting it is to be surrounded by people who see nothing but the coronet? Coralie stared at him. The anger in his voice was real, raw, in a way that caught her off guard. This was not the cold, indifferent aristocrat who dismissed 10 noble daughters without blinking. This was something else. Someone else. I don't want to marry any of them, he continued, his voice dropping to something almost confessional. I don't want to marry anyone. But my grandmother won't relent, and the parade will never end unless I give her a reason to stop. Understanding dawned, cold and clarifying as winter light. You want me to be your reason. I want you to be my shield. He set down his glass, crossed his arms over his chest. A temporary arrangement, a pretend courtship that will satisfy my grandmother long enough for me to resolve certain matters, after which we'll part ways amicably, and you'll be compensated for your trouble. Coralie laughed, the sound sharp and incredulous in the quiet library. Compensated. Your Grace, in the time it took you to bring me to this library, Lady Pemberton has undoubtedly dismissed me. I have no position to return to. I have no references to secure another. You've just destroyed my life, and you're offering compensation? For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed his features, a crack in the carefully maintained facade. I didn't intend. The door burst open. He never intends anything, a bright voice declared, but somehow it always works out. Hello, I'm Sibylla. You must be the girl who'd rather read than watch my brother reject a parade of vapid debutantes. I think I love you already. The young woman who swept into the library was nothing like her brother. Where Crispin Ashworth was all sharp edges and controlled stillness, Lady Sibylla Ashworth was motion and color. Auburn hair escaping its pins, green eyes sparkling with mischief, a gown of peacock blue that swirled around her as she crossed the room to seize Coralie's hands. Don't let him frighten you, Sibylla said breathlessly. He's absolutely terrible at talking to people, always has been. Our father used to say he'd have made an excellent monk if he could have tolerated the other monks. Sibylla, the Duke's voice carried a warning. Oh, hush. You've just publicly selected an unknown companion over 10 of the finest families in England. The least you can do is let me explain things properly before grandmother arrives to murder us all. Despite everything, the chaos, the uncertainty, the growing certainty that her life had just careened off a cliff, Coralie felt her lips twitch. Lady Sibylla's energy was infectious, impossible to resist entirely. Perhaps someone should explain, Coralie managed, because at the moment, I understand only that I've been publicly singled out, privately ambushed, and will almost certainly be homeless by morning." "Homeless?" Sibylla whirled on her brother, horrified. "Crispin, you didn't. I'm handling it." "You're handling it badly, as usual." Sibylla turned back to Coralie, her grip on her hands tightening with earnest determination. "Here's what you need to know, Miss Whitmore. Our father died 8 months ago. Very sudden. Very terrible. Crispin inherited the title and immediately retreated into his ledgers and his library, like a wounded animal hiding in a cave." "That's not. It's exactly what you did," Sibylla continued, ignoring her brother entirely. "Meanwhile, our grandmother decided that the solution to grief was duty. Specifically, the duty to marry and produce an heir. She's been parading eligible women through this house for months. Dinners, parties, teas, musicals, all of them excuses to throw another hopeful debutante at Crispin's head." Coralie glanced at the Duke, who had retreated to the fireplace and was staring into the flames with the expression of a man enduring torture. "Today was supposed to be the grand finale," Sibylla continued. 10 candidates, presented formally, with the expectation that he'd choose at least one to pursue. Instead, I refused them all." The Duke's voice was flat, which my grandmother anticipated. What she didn't anticipate was that I'd find an alternative. Me. Coralie pulled her hands free from Sibylla's grip, took a step backward. "I'm the alternative. The unexpected variable that disrupts her plans." The Duke turned from the fireplace, and approval flickered in his eyes. "You understand quickly. I understand that you've thrown me into a scandal without my consent. That's not the same as understanding your intentions." "My intentions are simple." He crossed his arms again, that guarded posture that seemed to be his default. "I need someone to play the role of a potential match, someone intelligent enough to navigate society, but unknown enough to disappear when the charade is no longer necessary. Someone who has no investment in actually marrying me. And you chose me because I was reading book spines instead of watching you? I chose you because you weren't watching me at all." His voice softened fractionally. "Do you know how long it's been since someone in my presence simply forgot I was there? Since someone was more interested in what I might think than what I might provide?" Coralie opened her mouth to respond, but Sibylla cut in before she could speak. "What my brother is badly trying to say is that you're different. You don't want anything from him. You're not calculating whether your future children would be viscounts or earls. You were standing in the corner, minding your own business, genuinely not caring about any of it. And that made him notice you more than any of those other women, managed in 3 hours of trying." The library door opened again, and a footman stepped inside, his face carefully neutral. "Your Grace, the Dowager Duchess requests your presence in her sitting room." Immediately, the Duke's jaw tightened. "Tell her I'll be there shortly." "She was quite insistent, Your Grace. She also asked that Miss Whitmore attend." A chill ran through Coralie. The Dowager Duchess. The woman whose plans had just been spectacularly derailed. The woman who would almost certainly view Coralie as an enemy. "I'll handle grandmother," Sibylla said quickly. "Crispin, you stay here and actually explain the arrangement properly. Use small words. Be human about it." She swept from the room before either of them could protest, leaving Coralie alone with the Duke once more. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. "The arrangement," Coralie said slowly, "would involve what, exactly?" "Public courtship. You'd be presented as an acquaintance of my sister's, which, technically, you now are. We'd attend events together, be seen in conversation, enough to suggest genuine interest without crossing into impropriety. And in exchange, Compensation. I'll settle whatever debts your family carries. When the arrangement ends, you'll have references to secure any position you desire, and Lady Pemberton's dismissal will be rendered irrelevant. I'll ensure you have prospects far beyond paid companionship. It was more than generous. It was transformative. The kind of offer that could change her family's circumstances permanently. And yet, why should I trust you? The question came out sharper than she intended. You've just demonstrated a willingness to make unilateral decisions about my life without consulting me. What guarantee do I have that you won't simply discard me when I'm no longer useful? The Duke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its coldness. You don't have any guarantee. You have only my word, which I understand means nothing to you at this moment. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. My grandmother will expect an answer tonight. Take the next hour to consider. The green guest suite has been prepared for you. Sibylla will show you the way. And if I refuse? He looked back at her, and for just a moment, that controlled mask slipped. She saw something beneath: exhaustion, loneliness, the particular grief of someone who'd stopped believing in much of anything. Then you return to whatever remains of your position with Lady Pemberton, and I continue drowning in suitable candidates until my grandmother wears me down, or I simply stop caring which one I choose. His voice hardened again. The choice, Miss Whitmore, is yours. But choose wisely. Opportunities like this rarely knock twice. He left, and Coralie stood alone in the library, surrounded by thousands of books and the weight of a decision that would alter everything. The green guest suite was larger than the entire upper floor of Coralie's family home. She stood in the center of it, turning slowly to absorb the details: the canopied bed with its embroidered silk hangings, the writing desk positioned to catch morning light, the marble fireplace where flames already danced, the dressing room visible through an arched doorway. Fresh flowers perfumed the air, roses and lilies arranged with casual artistry that probably cost more than her monthly wages. Someone had laid out a nightgown of cotton so fine it felt like water against her fingertips. This was not her world. Every elegant surface screamed that truth. And yet, Coralie moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, torches flickered along gravel paths, illuminating gardens that seemed to stretch into infinity. Somewhere in this house, the Dowager Duchess was likely sharpening her knives. Somewhere, Lady Pemberton was composing a letter that would ensure Coralie never worked in polite society again. But here, in this borrowed room, she had 1 hour and a choice to make. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Consider all variables before committing to a position. Emotion clouds judgment. Logic illuminates it. Logic, then. She crossed to the writing desk, found paper and ink waiting as if someone had anticipated her need, and began to write. Arguments against. Temporary arrangement with permanent consequences. Reputation damage when truth emerges. Entering a world designed to reject outsiders. Trusting a stranger. Arguments. 4. Family debts resolved. Future employment secured. Current position already destroyed. Alternative is returning to nothing. She stared at the lists, the ink drying on words that would determine her fate. The logical choice was obvious. She had nothing to lose that hadn't already been taken. But logic didn't account for the cold knot of fear in her stomach. Logic didn't explain why the Duke's gray eyes kept appearing in her mind, or why his admission, "Do you know how long it's been since someone forgot I was there?" had lodged beneath her ribs like a splinter. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "It's Sibylla. May I come in?" Coralie folded the paper quickly, tucking it beneath a book. "Yes." Lady Sibylla entered with considerably less energy than before. Her expression was subdued, almost cautious, as if she'd spent the intervening time contemplating consequences. "Grandmother is managing her feelings," Sibylla said carefully. "Crispin is with her now. I thought I'd check on you. I'm considering my options." "And?" Sibylla settled into a chair by the fire, arranging her skirts with practiced grace. "What have you concluded?" Coralie remained at the desk, maintaining distance. "That your brother has placed me in an impossible position. If I refuse, I return to ruin. If I accept, I enter a deception that could destroy me far more thoroughly when it ends. That's remarkably clear-eyed. I don't have the luxury of delusion, Lady Sibylla. I've spent 3 years as a paid companion. I've watched how society treats those who overreach. The fall is always brutal." Sibylla was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its playful edge entirely. "My brother isn't cruel. I know how this looks. The rich duke playing games with a vulnerable woman's life. But that's not who he is." She leaned forward, earnest and urgent. "He's been drowning since father died. The pressure, the expectations, the endless parade of women who see only the title. It's crushing him. When he saw you today, standing apart, genuinely uninterested in the spectacle, I think you were the first real thing he'd encountered in months. That's not a foundation for any kind of arrangement, isn't it? Most marriages in our world are built on far less. At least this would be built on mutual need and honest terms." Coralie turned back to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the dark glass. She could see herself there, a woman in borrowed finery, standing in a borrowed room, contemplating a borrowed life. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have conditions." She heard Sibylla's intake of breath, surprised, but pleased. "Tell me." Coralie faced her, drawing herself up to her full height. This was the moment. Whatever happened next, she would not enter this arrangement as a passive participant, a pawn to be moved and discarded at someone else's convenience. "First, my family must be informed appropriately, not by some messenger delivering shocking news. I want a letter in my own hand, explaining that I've accepted a position as your companion for the season. No mention of courtship or schemes, a respectable explanation for my absence." "Reasonable," Sibylla nodded. "What else?" "Second, when this ends, and it will end, I want more than references. I want introductions. Real connections that can secure me a future beyond paid companionship. Your brother speaks of compensation, but money runs out. Opportunities don't. I can do better than introductions." Sibylla's eyes lit with determination. "I know everyone worth knowing in London. By the time this arrangement concludes, you'll have your choice of positions. Governesses to duchesses, companions to countesses, perhaps even something more. I give you my word." Coralie held her gaze, measuring the sincerity there, finding it genuine. "Third condition. This one mattered most. The moment your brother decides to pursue a real match, Lady Narcissa or anyone else, this ends immediately. I won't be kept as a convenient shield while he conducts an actual courtship. I won't be made a fool of publicly. Crispin would never. I don't know what your brother would or wouldn't do. I've known him for less than an hour, and in that time, he's upended my entire life without consultation." Coralie's voice hardened with conviction she didn't entirely feel. "I need his word on this, not yours. His." The door opened. The Duke stood in the threshold, his expression unreadable. How long had he been listening? His presence seemed to fill the doorway, tall and somehow more intimidating than he'd been in the library. "You have it," he said quietly. "All 3 conditions. My word as Duke of Ravenmore." Coralie studied him, the tension in his shoulders, the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his hands remained carefully still at his sides. He was a man held together by control, by discipline, by sheer force of will. What would happen if that control ever slipped? "Then we have an agreement," she heard herself say. He crossed the room, extending his hand. Not the formal bow a duke would offer a lady, but the straightforward gesture of an equal sealing a bargain. She took it. His grip was warm, firm, sending an unexpected jolt up her arm. For a moment, neither of them moved, caught in the gravity of what they'd just agreed to. "Welcome to Ravenmore, Miss Whitmore," he said. "I hope you survive it." The Dowager Duchess Augusta Ashworth received Coralie in her private sitting room at precisely 9 o'clock the following morning. The summons had arrived with breakfast, a crisp note on cream paper, the handwriting sharp and angular. "Miss Whitmore will attend me at 9. Punctuality is expected. Coralie had dressed carefully, choosing a gray morning dress that Lady Sibylla had provided. Simple, modest, nothing that could be accused of overreaching. Her hair was pinned severely. Her expression, she hoped, was neutral. She would not give this woman ammunition. The sitting room was smaller than she'd expected, decorated in shades of silver and pale blue that should have been cold, but somehow weren't. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. The dowager sat in a high-backed chair that might as well have been a throne. She wore black, but made it look like armor rather than mourning. Her silver hair was swept into an elaborate arrangement. Her gray eyes, the same shade as her grandson's, but sharper, more assessing, fixed on Coralie with the intensity of a hawk spotting movement in distant grass. "Sit." Coralie sat in the indicated chair, folding her hands in her lap. She would not fidget. She would not show fear. She would be exactly what she was, a woman who had nothing left to lose. "Your name is Coralie Whitmore." The dowager's voice was crisp, clipped. "Your father was Edmund Whitmore, a scholar of some reputation at Oxford, until his health failed 6 years ago. Your mother is Margaret Whitmore, née Dorsey, daughter of a country vicar. You have no siblings, no fortune, no connections of any significance." It wasn't a question. She'd already investigated. "That's correct, Your Grace. You've spent the past 3 years as paid companion to Lady Narcissa Pemberton, a position you acquired through your father's former colleague, Professor Hartwell. Lady Pemberton found you adequate, but unremarkable, quiet, forgettable." The dowager's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Until yesterday. I had no intention of being noticed, Your Grace. And yet here you are, noticed, installed in my green guest suite, wearing clothes my granddaughter has provided." The dowager leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what precisely do you think you're doing?" Coralie met her gaze directly. "Surviving, Your Grace." Silence stretched between them, sharp as broken glass. "Surviving," the dowager repeated. An interesting choice of words. An accurate one. Yesterday morning, I was a paid companion with modest prospects. By yesterday evening, your grandson had publicly singled me out, destroying any chance of continuing in that role. I had 2 options: refuse his arrangement and return to ruin, or accept and hope to emerge with better prospects than I started with. Coralie kept her voice steady, refusing to flinch. "I chose the latter. I suspect you would have done the same." The dowager's eyebrow rose fractionally. "You compare yourself to me?" "I compare our circumstances at their lowest points. You were once a baron's daughter, with no fortune to speak of, married into one of the oldest families in England. Society whispered that you'd overreached, that the match was unsuitable, that you'd never be accepted. You proved them wrong through sheer force of will. I intend to do the same." The silence that followed was weighted, considering, as if the Dowager were recalculating an equation she'd thought she'd already solved. "You've done your research," the Dowager said finally. "Professor Hartwell spoke of you occasionally. He knew your husband at university. He said you were the most formidable woman he'd ever encountered." Coralie allowed herself a small smile. I thought it prudent to understand what I was facing. The Dowager rose, moving to the window with practiced grace. She stood with her back to Coralie, looking out over the gardens that stretched toward distant hills. "My grandson is damaged." The words came out flat, factual. His father's death broke something in him. He was in Scotland when it happened. Some estate matter that couldn't wait. By the time he returned, his father was gone. No chance for goodbye. No chance for closure. He's been somewhere else ever since. Coralie thought of her own father, retreating into silence after his world collapsed. Different circumstances, same response. The human heart, it seemed, had limited ways of processing devastation. "I've watched him these past months," the Dowager continued, "performing his duties, managing the estates, attending Parliament, but not living, not feeling, just existing." She turned, and for the first time, Coralie saw something human beneath the formidable exterior. A grandmother worried about her grandson. "I pushed the marriage candidates because I thought duty might anchor him, give him something to focus on besides grief. I was wrong. Your Grace, you're not what I would have chosen." The Dowager's voice hardened again, armor sliding back into place. "You have no fortune, no family, no training for this position. Society will scrutinize your every word, every gesture, and every choice of ribbon. They will look for reasons to dismiss you, and they will find them. I'm aware. Are you?" The Dowager crossed to stand before her, close enough that Coralie had to tilt her head back to meet her eyes. "Let me be absolutely clear, Miss Whitmore. If this arrangement is genuine, if you've truly entered it for survival rather than ambition, then I won't stand in your way. My grandson has chosen, and I've learned that fighting his choices only drives him further into isolation. And if you decide my motives aren't genuine," the Dowager smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a woman who had spent decades wielding power and understood precisely how to destroy those who crossed her. "Then I will dismantle you so thoroughly that no household in England will touch you, not as a companion, not as a governess, not even as a scullery maid. You will cease to exist in any world that matters." The threat hung in the air, absolute and believable. "I understand, Your Grace." Coralie stood, matching the older woman's posture. "But let me be equally clear. I have no designs on your grandson beyond the terms of our agreement. I don't want his title, his fortune, or his hand. I want only what I was promised: stability, references, and a chance at a future better than the one I left behind. We'll see." "Yes." Coralie moved toward the door, then paused, looking back with a calm she didn't entirely feel. "We will." She left with her head high and her hand steady, but her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. She'd just faced down the Dowager Duchess of Ravenmore and survived. But surviving the first battle wasn't the same as winning the war. The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of transformation. Madame Fontaine, the modiste who served the finest families in London, arrived at Ravenmore House with 3 assistants and enough fabric samples to outfit an army. She circled Coralie with measuring tape and pins, murmuring in rapid French about bone structure and coloring and the particular shades that would bring out the warmth in her complexion. "The burgundy for evening," she declared, holding up a sample that seemed to glow with inner fire. "Cream with gold thread for the Thornwood ball. Sage green for morning calls. And this. She held up a bolt of deep blue silk that seemed to capture moonlight itself. This for something special. Something that will make them remember your name. Coralie stood motionless through hours of fittings, pricked by pins, draped in fabrics that cost more than her father's annual pension. Lady Sibylla supervised with boundless enthusiasm, adding shawls and gloves and delicate slippers until the orders grew so extensive that Coralie lost track entirely. "This is too much," Coralie protested when the modiste finally departed, leaving behind a wake of scattered pins and fabric swatches. "This is necessary." Sibylla's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You're going to be seen with a duke. Every stitch will be scrutinized, every seam examined for flaws. We're not buying luxury. We're buying armor." The dancing instructor arrived next, a severe Frenchman named Monsieur Beaumont, who clicked his tongue at Coralie's country training and immediately set about correcting every step she'd ever learned. "No, no, no. The waltz is not a march, mademoiselle. You must flow. You must float. You must make him feel that holding you is the most natural thing in the world." She practiced until her feet ached, until the steps became second nature, until Monsieur Beaumont grudgingly admitted she might not disgrace herself entirely at a society ball. Between lessons, Coralie studied the book Crispin's father had compiled. She memorized family connections, learned which alliances were solid and which were merely convenient, traced the intricate web of obligations and resentments that governed society. It was like learning a new language, one where a raised eyebrow could convey volumes and the wrong curtsy could end a career. "You're taking this seriously," Sibylla observed one afternoon, finding Coralie bent over the book with notes scattered around her. "Most women in your position would simply enjoy the dresses and parties." "Most women in my position would already have connections to fall back on if things went wrong," Coralie replied, without looking up. "I don't have that luxury. If I fail completely." Sibylla was quiet for a moment. "You won't fail. Crispin wouldn't have chosen you if he didn't believe you could succeed. Your brother chose me because I was reading book spines. That's hardly a comprehensive assessment of my abilities." "No," Sibylla said softly. "He chose you because you were the only genuine thing he'd seen in months. That's worth more than you realize." Through it all, the Duke remained absent. He appeared at meals, exchanging polite pleasantries before retreating to his study. He nodded when they passed in hallways, his expression carefully neutral. He made no attempt at private conversation, maintained careful distance at all times. It was exactly what she'd expected from their arrangement. So why did it bother her? On the 5th day, Coralie escaped to the library. She'd discovered that she could request any book from the vast collection, that the servants would bring her tea without being asked, that this room had become her sanctuary in a house full of elegant strangers. She'd worked her way through Wollstonecraft and started on Burke, finding unexpected pleasure in arguing with his philosophy in her mind. She was deep in a passage about tradition and reform when she realized she wasn't alone. The Duke stood in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. He'd removed his coat, his waistcoat undone, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked younger somehow, more human. "You're in my chair," he said. Coralie glanced down at the leather armchair she'd claimed by the fire. "I didn't realize it was reserved." "It isn't." He moved into the room, crossing to the sideboard to pour himself a drink. "But it was my father's favorite. I've avoided it since—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "I can move." "No." He settled into the opposite chair, stretching his long legs toward the fire with a sigh that suggested exhaustion held at bay too long. "It's good to see it used. He would have hated it gathering dust." Silence fell between them, but it was different from the tense quiet of their earlier encounters. Softer somehow, less guarded. "You've been avoiding me," Coralie said. "I've been giving you space." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching it catch the firelight. "The first weeks are overwhelming. I didn't want to add to the pressure." "That's surprisingly thoughtful. You sound surprised." "You've given me little reason to expect thoughtfulness, Your Grace." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Fair point. I did rather throw you into the deep end without warning. You destroyed my life in approximately 4 seconds. And rebuilt it in the days following." He met her eyes, his gaze steady. "The debts are settled. Your parents received your letter yesterday, along with a substantial gift to ensure their comfort. Lady Pemberton has been persuaded to keep her opinions private." Coralie's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. She'd known, theoretically, that he'd follow through on his promises, but hearing it confirmed, knowing her father could afford proper care, her mother could stop taking in mending, was different. "Thank you." The words came out thick. "Don't thank me. It's the least I owed you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've been trying to determine what kind of person you are, Miss Whitmore. These past days, watching you navigate Sibylla's enthusiasm and Madame Fontaine's fittings and Monsieur Beaumont's tyranny, you've handled everything with remarkable composure. I've had practice being overlooked. It's not so different from being scrutinized. You simply learn to control what shows on your face. And beneath the face, what shows there?" The question was unexpectedly intimate. Coralie looked away, focusing on the fire dancing in the hearth. Terror, mostly. The constant fear that I'll make some mistake, reveal some ignorance, prove to everyone that I don't belong here. She paused, surprised at her own honesty. "Your grandmother was right. I'm not prepared for this world. I'm learning the steps, but I don't hear the music the way everyone else does." "Neither do I." She looked up. He was watching her with an intensity that made the air feel thin. "I've never heard the music," he continued quietly. "I've spent my entire life performing steps that someone else choreographed, playing a role that was written before I was born. Duke's son, Duke's heir. Duke. The title defines everything. Who I speak to, what I'm allowed to want, whom I'm expected to marry. Sometimes I wonder if there's anything underneath it all, or if I'm simply the title wearing a human costume." Coralie recognized the loneliness in his voice because she'd felt it herself, standing in corners at Lady Pemberton's parties, invisible among the glittering guests, wondering if anyone would notice if she simply vanished. "You're more than the title," she said. "You read Wollstonecraft. You keep your father's chair empty rather than pretend he's not gone. You noticed a paid companion reading book spines when you could have noticed any of the beautiful women being paraded before you." She met his eyes directly. "Those aren't the actions of someone who's only a costume." A muscle worked in his jaw. The guarded distance that he maintained so carefully seemed to crack, just slightly. "You see more than most people, Miss Whitmore." "Coralie." The correction slipped out before she could stop it. "If we're going to convince society we're courting, you should probably use my given name. Coralie." He said it slowly, as if testing the shape of it, letting it roll across his tongue. "Then you should call me Crispin, at least in private. That seems improper. Everything about this arrangement is improper." A ghost of amusement crossed his features, transforming him into someone younger, less burdened. "We might as well be comfortable in our impropriety." She laughed, a real laugh, surprising herself with its warmth. He looked equally surprised, as if he'd forgotten laughter existed. "The Thornwood Ball is in 4 days," he said, his voice shifting back to something more practical. "It will be our first public appearance together. People will be watching for any sign of weakness, any indication that this courtship is less than genuine. I've been preparing. I know. Monsieur Beaumont reports that you're a quick study, despite his complaints. Crispin rose, moving to a shelf and pulling down a slim volume. But there's more to society than dance steps. Here. He handed her a book, not literature, but a guide of some kind. She opened it to find detailed descriptions of London's most influential families, their alliances, their rivalries, their carefully guarded secrets. My father compiled it over 30 years. Every family that matters, every connection worth knowing. Crispin's voice was soft, almost reverent. It was his way of navigating a world he never felt part of either. Coralie traced the careful handwriting in the margins, notes, observations, warnings, a map of treacherous territory drawn by someone who'd learned it the hard way. Thank you. For this. For all of it. Don't thank me yet. He moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. The Thornwood Ball will determine whether any of this can work. If we fail there, if society decides you're an imposter, nothing I do will be able to protect you. Then we won't fail. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his gray eyes. No, he said finally. I don't believe we will. He left, and Coralie sat alone with his father's book and the lingering warmth of a conversation that had somehow, impossibly, begun to feel like something real. She was supposed to be performing, playing a role for a temporary audience. So why did she find herself replaying his words, "You see more than most people," like a melody she couldn't forget? This was dangerous. This was exactly what she'd promised herself she wouldn't let happen. But as she opened the book and began to study the treacherous landscape ahead, Coralie couldn't quite convince herself that danger was a reason to stop. The Thornwood Ballroom blazed with 10,000 candles. Coralie stood at the top of the grand staircase, her fingers resting lightly on Crispin's arm, and tried to remember how to breathe. Below them, a sea of silk and jewels rippled with movement and whispered conversation. Every face seemed turned toward them. Every eye assessed, calculated, judged. The cream gown with gold embroidery caught the light, transforming her into someone she barely recognized. Madame Fontaine had outdone herself. The bodice fitted perfectly. The skirts fell in elegant cascades, and the delicate gold thread seemed to make her skin glow. Lady Sibylla had woven matching ribbons through her dark hair and fastened a borrowed diamond pendant at her throat. She looked like she belonged. She felt like a fraud. "Steady," Crispin murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "They can smell fear like wolves scenting prey." "Comforting. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to ensure you survive." His hand covered hers briefly, warm and solid and reassuring. "Remember, you belong here tonight because I say you do. My word is the only one that matters." The majordomo announced them in a voice that carried across the ballroom like thunder. His Grace, the Duke of Ravenmore, Miss Coralie Whitmore. They descended together, and the whispers exploded around them like fireworks. Coralie felt them wash over her like waves against a cliff, relentless, erosive, and determined to find weakness. She kept her chin high, her expression serene, her steps measured as they moved into the glittering chaos. Lady Sibylla appeared almost immediately, radiant in sapphire blue, drawing Coralie into an embrace that was equal parts greeting and strategic positioning. "Everyone's talking about you," Sibylla whispered against her ear. "Lady Marchmont called you surprisingly presentable. From her, that's practically a love letter. And the less generous opinions? Ignore them. Tonight is about being seen, nothing more. Let them look. Let them wonder. Give them nothing to confirm their suspicions." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Lord and Lady Blackwood seemed genuinely interested in her father's scholarly work, asking thoughtful questions about his research. The Sinclair twins flirted harmlessly and made her laugh despite herself. And everywhere, always, the weight of hostile attention. Lady Narcissa Pemberton held court near the refreshment tables, surrounded by sympathetic friends, who shot venomous glances toward Coralie whenever their paths crossed. She wore rose silk, her signature color, and a smile that could have curdled milk. Lady Hortense stood beside her, still smarting from the humiliation of the bride parade, whispering observations to her daughter with barely concealed malice. Coralie could feel their attention like a physical weight, tracking her movements, waiting for a misstep. The orchestra began a waltz, and suddenly Crispin was there, materializing from the crowd, his hand extended. "Miss Whitmore, I believe this dance is mine." It was not a question. His voice carried across the nearby clusters of guests, ensuring witnesses to his claim. This was performance, Coralie reminded herself. Strategy. The public courtship they'd agreed upon, so why did her pulse quicken when she placed her hand in his? They took the floor together, and she felt the room's attention sharpen. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Duke and his unsuitable choice, together for the first time in public. "You're thinking too much," Crispin murmured as they began to move. "I can see it in your shoulders." "I'm trying not to embarrass you." "Impossible." His hand pressed more firmly against her waist, guiding her into a turn. "You're the most graceful woman in this room." The rest of them shuffle through the steps. "You actually dance." The compliment caught her off guard, genuine warmth beneath his usual reserve. She stumbled slightly, and his arm tightened, steadying her. "Now you're blushing," he observed. "That's more dangerous than stumbling." "I'm not accustomed to compliments." "Then you've been surrounded by fools." He turned her again, and for a moment, the ballroom seemed to fall away. The watching eyes, the whispered judgments, the elaborate performance they were conducting. There was only the music, the movement, the unexpected safety of his arms. "You're different tonight," she said quietly. "Am I?" "Less guarded. Almost present." A new emotion flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "You told me I was more than the title. I've been thinking about that." And perhaps you were right." The waltz was ending, the final strains fading. "Perhaps it's time I started believing it." He released her with formal correctness, bowing over her hand in full view of the assembled guests. But his fingers lingered against hers a moment longer than necessary, and when he straightened, his expression held something new, something that looked dangerously like hope. The moment shattered when Lady Narcissa appeared. "Your Grace." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "What a touching display. I had no idea you were so accomplished a dancer, Miss Whitmore. Wherever did you learn? Country assemblies, I imagine. They must do things so differently in wherever it is you're from." "Oxfordshire," Coralie replied evenly. "And yes, we do things differently there. We judge people by their character rather than their pedigree." Lady Narcissa's smile tightened. "How quaint. Though I wonder, does character include deceiving one's way into a duke's good graces, pretending to be something one isn't?" "I've never pretended to be anything." Coralie held her gaze without flinching. "Unlike some who pretend to kindness while dealing in cruelty." The temperature around them dropped several degrees. Nearby conversations faltered as guests turned to watch the confrontation. "You forget yourself." Lady Narcissa's voice had lost its sweetness entirely. "You're a paid companion, dressed in borrowed finery, playing at a position you'll never hold. When the Duke tires of his little charity project, that's enough." Crispin's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Lady Narcissa, I believe your mother is looking for you. You should attend her immediately." It was a dismissal so absolute, so publicly devastating, that Lady Narcissa's face flushed crimson. For a moment, she seemed about to argue. Then, recognizing the steel in his expression, she retreated with what dignity she could salvage. "Are you all right?" Crispin asked quietly, as the watching guests quickly found other things to look at. "I'm fine." Coralie's hands were shaking, but she kept her voice steady. "She wasn't wrong, you know, about any of it. She was wrong about everything that mattered." He guided her toward the terrace doors, away from the crowd's attention. "Come, you need air, and I need to say something without an audience." The terrace was cool after the ballroom's heat, moonlight silvering the manicured gardens below. Coralie moved to the stone balustrade, gripping it to steady herself, while her heart slowly returned to normal. "You defended me," she said. "Of course I did. You didn't have to. Our arrangement doesn't require. Forget the arrangement." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through the cool night air. "What I did in there had nothing to do with strategy or performance." Coralie turned to face him, confused. "Then why?" "Because she was hurting you." His voice was rough, almost angry. "Because I couldn't stand watching you absorb her venom with that composed expression, while something in your eyes died. Because—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Because I care, Coralie. Against every rational intention, despite every warning I've given myself, I care what happens to you." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. "You're not supposed to care," she whispered. "That wasn't part of the agreement." "No, it wasn't." He stepped closer, and she could see the conflict in his expression, the war between what he should do and what he wanted. "But I've spent my entire life following agreements, honoring expectations, being what everyone needed me to be. Just once, I want to do what I actually want." "And what do you want?" he answered by cupping her face in his hands and kissing her. It was nothing like she'd imagined. Not that she'd imagined it. Not that she'd lain awake wondering what his lips would feel like against hers. It was softer than expected, tentative at first, as if giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't pull away. Her hands found his lapels, drawing him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that stole her breath and scattered her thoughts like leaves in wind. He tasted of champagne and something darker, something that made her dizzy with wanting. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, both breathing unsteadily, the moon had shifted position in the sky. "That wasn't supposed to happen," Coralie managed. "No." His thumbs traced gentle circles against her cheeks. "But I'm not sorry it did. Crispin, don't." His voice was tender, urgent. "Don't tell me all the reasons this is impossible. I know them all. I've been reciting them to myself for days. But right now, just for this moment, can we pretend none of them matter?" She should say no. Every rational thought screamed that this was dangerous, that she was setting herself up for devastation, that fairy tales didn't happen to girls like her. But looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and fear and desperate wanting that mirrored her own heart, she couldn't make herself refuse. "Just for this moment," she whispered. He kissed her again, and the moon rose higher, and somewhere inside the ballroom, an orchestra played on. Neither of them noticed when Lady Narcissa appeared briefly in the terrace doorway, her face twisting with fury before she vanished back into the light. 3 days after the Thornwood ball, everything began to unravel. It started with whispers, different from the usual gossip, sharper-edged and more deliberate. Coralie noticed servants falling silent when she entered rooms. She caught Lady Sibylla in urgent, hushed conversation with her grandmother, both of them looking troubled. "What's happening?" she asked Sibylla directly, after intercepting another loaded glance between the household staff. "Don't pretend nothing's wrong. I can see it." Sibylla hesitated, her usual brightness dimmed. "There are rumors. Lady Narcissa has been busy since the ball." "What kind of rumors?" "The kind designed to destroy you." Sibylla took her hand, leading her to a private alcove. "She's telling everyone that you're not who you claim to be, that your father wasn't merely a scholar who fell on hard times, that he was dismissed from Oxford for academic dishonesty, that your family has been living off charity and deception for years." Coralie's blood ran cold. "That's a lie. My father was ill. He resigned because he couldn't fulfill his duties. There was no dishonesty, I know. But lies travel faster than truth in society, and Lady Narcissa has powerful friends." Sibylla's expression was grim. "It gets worse. She's claiming that you deliberately orchestrated the scene at the bride parade, that you conspired with an accomplice, some servant she bribed to confirm her story, to plan the entire thing. I was standing in a corner reading book spines. I believe you. Crispin believes you. But belief isn't proof, and Lady Narcissa is demanding an investigation." The wall seemed to close in around Coralie. She'd known this world was dangerous, had prepared herself for judgment and scrutiny, but she hadn't anticipated an active campaign of destruction. "Where is Crispin?" "With grandmother. They've been closeted together for hours. Lady Narcissa's father is threatening to involve the newspapers if the Duke doesn't address the situation." Sibylla's voice turned bitter. Apparently, his daughter's wounded pride constitutes a matter of public concern. Coralie found them in the dowager's sitting room, Crispin pacing before the fireplace, his grandmother rigid in her chair, both wearing expressions that suggested the conversation had been heated. "Miss Whitmore," the dowager's voice was carefully neutral, "we were just discussing you." "I heard." Coralie entered the room, closing the door behind her. "Lady Narcissa is attempting to destroy me with lies. What I don't understand is why anyone is listening. Because lies are easier to believe when they confirm what people want to think." Crispin stopped pacing, his face drawn with frustration. "You're an outsider who appeared from nowhere and captured a duke's attention. Of course they want to believe there's something sinister behind it. Then we fight back. We prove she's lying. How?" The dowager's question was sharp. "Your father's colleagues have scattered. Your mother is hardly a credible witness in society's eyes. The only people who can vouch for your character are already connected to this house, which makes their testimony suspect. So I'm to be destroyed by fabrications while everyone watches. No one is being destroyed." Crispin crossed to her, taking her hands despite his grandmother's raised eyebrow. "I will not allow it." "You may not have a choice." The dowager rose, moving to her writing desk. "Lord Pemberton has significant influence. If he decides to make this a crusade against our family's judgment, it could affect Crispin's standing in Parliament, our business dealings, even Sibylla's prospects. Then perhaps the simplest solution is for me to leave." The words cost Coralie more than she'd expected. "If I'm gone, there's nothing to attack. The scandal dies, and your family is protected." "No." Crispin's grip on her hands tightened. "Absolutely not." "Your Grace, I said no." His voice carried authority she hadn't heard before. Not cold, but absolute. "I will not let them drive you out. I will not give Lady Narcissa the victory she wants, and I will not lose you. Not like this." The dowager watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. "You care for her, genuinely." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Crispin didn't look away from Coralie's face. "I tried not to. I told myself it was strategy, convenience, a temporary arrangement. But I was lying to myself, and I'm done with lies. Silence fell over the room, heavy with implication. Then we have a problem, the Dowager said finally. Because if this is genuine, if you truly intend to pursue this girl, then Lady Narcissa's campaign becomes infinitely more dangerous. She's not just attacking a temporary companion. She's attacking a potential duchess. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I never intended. Coralie stepped back, releasing Crispin's hands. This was supposed to be temporary, a performance. We agreed. Agreements change. The Dowager's voice was surprisingly gentle. First, we must address the immediate threat. How? Crispin demanded. The Pemberton Ball is in 3 days. Everyone who matters will be there. If Miss Whitmore doesn't attend, it will be seen as an admission of guilt. If she does attend, she'll face Lady Narcissa on her own ground. Then I'll attend. Coralie's voice steadied as she spoke. I won't hide. I won't give her the satisfaction of seeing me retreat. And if she produces some fabricated evidence, some witness willing to lie for payment, then I'll face that too. Coralie lifted her chin, finding reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. I've spent my entire life being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. Perhaps it's time I proved that was their mistake, not mine. The Dowager studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Perhaps, she said slowly. You'll do after all. The Pemberton Ball was a battlefield disguised as a celebration. Lady Narcissa had orchestrated everything with military precision. The guest list weighted toward her allies, the room arranged to maximize her advantages, even the music selected to emphasize her sophistication. When Coralie entered on Crispin's arm, she felt the hostility immediately, a wall of cold assessment from every direction. Courage, Crispin murmured. We face this together. But they weren't together. Within 20 minutes, he'd been drawn away by Lord Pemberton himself, a private conversation that was clearly designed to separate them. Coralie found herself alone in a sea of hostile faces, Lady Sibylla desperately trying to reach her through a crowd that seemed to deliberately block her path. Lady Narcissa struck during a lull in the music. Miss Whitmore, her voice carried across the immediate area, ensuring witnesses. How brave of you to attend. I wasn't sure you'd dare show your face after everything that's come to light. Nothing has come to light except your willingness to fabricate lies. Coralie kept her voice steady, though her pulse raced. I'm not afraid of truth, Lady Narcissa. Are you? Truth? Lady Narcissa laughed, a brittle sound. The truth is that you're a fortune hunter who wormed her way into a duke's household through deception. The truth is that your father was a disgrace who left Oxford under a cloud of suspicion. The truth is that you're a petty, jealous woman who can't accept that a duke chose someone else over you. The words came from behind Coralie, a voice she didn't recognize. She turned to find an elderly woman in severe black, her white hair swept into an elaborate arrangement, her eyes sharp with intelligence. Lady Hartwell. Lady Narcissa's composure flickered. I didn't realize you were acquainted with Miss Whitmore. I'm acquainted with her father. Lady Hartwell moved to stand beside Coralie, her presence commanding immediate attention. Edmund Whitmore was the finest scholar Oxford produced in a generation. When his health failed, he resigned with honor because he refused to give less than his best to his students. There was no dishonesty. There was no cloud of suspicion. There was only a good man faced with impossible circumstances, handled with more integrity than you've shown in this entire pathetic campaign. The silence that followed was absolute. My husband was Edmund's colleague for 15 years, Lady Hartwell continued. Professor Hartwell, whom I believe provided Miss Whitmore's original reference for the Pemberton household. Had I known she was working for your family, Lady Narcissa, I would have warned her about your character. Some apples, it seems, fall very close to their rotten trees." Lady Narcissa's face had gone pale, then crimson. "You can't speak to me this way. I can, and I am. Your father may have money and influence, but my family has something more valuable. Reputation earned through generations of honorable conduct." Lady Hartwell turned to Coralie, her expression softening. "My dear, I apologize for not reaching out sooner. When I heard what was happening, I came as quickly as I could." Coralie's eyes burned with unexpected tears. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Edmund's daughter shouldn't have to defend herself against lies. That's what friends are for." But even as hope flickered, Coralie saw something that extinguished it completely. Across the room, Lord Pemberton was speaking to Crispin with an expression of triumph, and in his hand was a document, papers of some kind, that made Crispin's face go ashen. "Excuse me." Coralie pushed through the crowd, ignoring the whispers that followed her. By the time she reached them, Crispin was standing rigid, the papers crushed in his fist. "What is it?" she demanded. "What has he shown you?" "Nothing of consequence." Crispin's voice was flat, controlled in a way that frightened her. "We should leave. Miss Whitmore should see it." Lord Pemberton's smile was oily with satisfaction. "After all, it concerns her directly." Crispin's jaw tightened, but he handed her the crumpled papers. They were letters. Forged letters, supposedly written by Coralie to an unnamed accomplice, detailing a scheme to entrap the Duke of Ravenmore through his sister's kindness. The handwriting was close enough to hers to be damning, the details specific enough to seem authentic. "These are fabrications." Her voice shook despite her efforts to control it. "I never wrote these. I don't even know who this accomplice is supposed to be." "The evidence suggests otherwise." Lord Pemberton's voice carried to the nearby guests, who had stopped pretending not to listen. "Your Grace, surely you can see now that you've been deceived. This woman has manipulated you from the beginning. The honorable course would be to end the association immediately and apologize to my daughter for the embarrassment she's suffered." Coralie looked at Crispin, desperate for him to refuse, to defend her, to do anything. But his expression had closed completely. The warm, present man who'd kissed her on the terrace was gone, replaced by the cold Duke who'd rejected 10 brides without blinking. "Crispin," she whispered, "you can't believe. I don't know what to believe." The words came out hollow. "These letters, the details they contain, things only you would know. Because someone watched me, listened to conversations, fabricated evidence based on real information twisted into lies." Her voice broke. "I thought you knew me. I thought perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." Something hardened inside her, a wall slamming into place around her heart. "If you need to discuss whether I'm a liar and a schemer, then you don't know me at all. And if you don't know me after everything we've shared, then this was never real to begin with." She turned and walked away. The crowd parted before her. Whether in sympathy or satisfaction, she couldn't tell, and didn't care. She heard Sibylla calling her name, heard Crispin saying, "Wait." But she didn't stop. She walked through the grand entrance, past the startled footman, into the cold night air. She kept walking until she found a quiet street corner where no one could see her, and then she finally allowed herself to break. The tears came in waves, washing away the illusion she'd let herself believe. Of course it wasn't real. Of course the Duke would doubt her when confronted with evidence, however false. She was nobody, nothing, a paid companion who'd forgotten her place and dreamed above her station. By the time the tears stopped, she knew what she had to do. She walked back to Ravenmore House through the dark streets, ignoring the dangers of the hour. The servants let her in with worried expressions, but she brushed past their concerns. She climbed the stairs to the green guest suite and began to pack. Not the beautiful dresses. Those belonged to the fantasy. Not the jewels or accessories, or any of the borrowed finery. Just her own things. The gray wool dress she'd arrived in, her mother's small pearl brooch, the book Crispin had given her. She hesitated over the book. It represented everything she was trying to leave behind. The hope, the connection, the impossible belief that someone like him could care for someone like her. But she kept it. Some wounds were worth remembering. She wrote 2 letters, one to Sibylla, thanking her for friendship that had felt genuine even if everything else was false. One to Crispin. The second letter took 4 attempts. Your Grace, I am returning to my family. The evidence against me is fabricated, but I understand why you might doubt that claim. I have no proof to offer except my word, and clearly that isn't enough. Please don't try to find me. This arrangement was always meant to end. Let it end here, cleanly, before more damage is done. I don't regret the time we shared. I only regret believing it could be more than what it was. Yours in farewell, Coralie Whitmore. She sealed the letter and left it on the writing desk. By dawn, she was in a hired carriage, watching London disappear behind her. By noon, she was home. The familiar rooms felt smaller than she remembered, shabbier and more confining. Her mother embraced her with worried questions. Her father looked at her with knowing sadness, as if he'd always expected this return. It was always going to end, he said quietly. Best it ended before you got hurt. But she was already hurt. That was the problem, and no amount of distance could change that. 3 days passed in gray monotony. Coralie helped her mother with the household tasks, read to her father in the evenings, and tried to pretend that her heart wasn't broken. She avoided all discussion of London, of Dukes, of anything that might remind her of what she'd lost. On the 4th day, a carriage arrived bearing the Ashworth crest. She expected Sibylla. Instead, a footman in Ravenmore livery handed her a sealed note and waited for a response. Miss Whitmore, Lady Hartwell, found the forger. He confessed everything. Lady Narcissa paid him £200 to fabricate evidence against you. But none of that matters. What matters is that I let you leave. I saw the pain in your eyes, and I let you walk away without explanation. I was trying to protect you by creating distance while I investigated who had been spying on us. I did it badly. I did everything badly. Please come back. Not for the arrangement, for me. Your presence makes me want to be present. Your absence makes me forget how to breathe. If you won't come for me, come for the truth. You deserve to hear what really happened. Crispin Coralie's hands trembled as she read it twice, 3 times. The handwriting was unsteady, nothing like the Duke's usual precise script. What is it? Her mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. He wants me to come back. Her mother was quiet for a moment. And what do you want? I don't know. The words came out strangled. He didn't fight for me. He stood there and said nothing while they tore me apart. Then let him explain why. Her mother crossed the room, taking her hands. When your father lost everything, I wanted to run away. I told myself it was for the best, that staying would only prolong the pain. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. I was wrong. Running doesn't make the wanting go away. It just makes you wonder what might have been. This is different. Is it? Her mother's eyes were gentle but knowing. You've been drifting through this house like a ghost for 3 days. You don't eat. You barely sleep. You stare at nothing for hours. That's not someone who's escaped a bad situation. That's someone who's left their heart behind. Coralie's eyes burned. He didn't fight for me. He stood there and said nothing while they tore me apart. Then let him explain why. Give him one conversation. If you still want to leave after that, I'll help you pack properly." Her mother squeezed her hands. "But at least know the truth before you make the choice permanent." Coralie looked at her father, who had appeared behind her mother. His expression was resigned, but he nodded slowly. "Not all chances should be thrown away," he said quietly. "Some are worth fighting for, even when fighting is terrifying." Against every rational instinct, against every protective wall she'd built around her wounded heart, Coralie found herself nodding. One conversation. That's all. The footman departed with her answer, and Coralie watched the carriage roll away with a mixture of dread and anticipation. She had one chance to hear the truth. Whether that truth would heal or destroy her, she couldn't know until she faced it. Her mother helped her pack a small bag. Nothing fancy, just essentials. Her father pressed a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius into her hands. "For courage," he said simply. "Whatever happens, remember who you are." The journey back to London felt endless. Coralie watched the countryside pass without seeing it, her mind churning with arguments and counter-arguments. What would she say? What could he possibly say that would change what had happened? But beneath the anger and hurt, there was something else. Hope. The stubborn, irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, there was an explanation that could make sense of everything. Ravenmore House rose before her in the afternoon light, as imposing as the first time she'd seen it. But this time, she didn't enter through the servants' entrance or wait to be summoned. She walked straight to the library. Crispin was there, as she'd somehow known he would be. He looked terrible. Unshaven, exhausted, his clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them, or hadn't slept at all. Coralie. Her name was a prayer on his lips. You came. Your letter was persuasive. She stayed near the door, not trusting herself to move closer. You said things have changed. Everything has changed. He rose from his father's chair. He'd been sitting in it, she noticed, not avoiding it anymore. Lady Narcissa has been exposed. The forger confessed everything. Lord Pemberton is facing social ruin for his daughter's actions. But none of that matters. None of it? None of it matters, because I let you leave. He crossed the room, stopping just out of reach, as if afraid to come closer. I saw the pain in your eyes, and I let you walk away without a word of explanation. I told myself I was protecting you, that showing emotion in front of our enemies would make things worse. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of how much you mattered to me. His voice cracked. I spent so long building walls. After my father died, after everything fell apart, the only way I survived was by not letting anyone close enough to hurt me. And then you appeared, reading book spines, ignoring my title, seeing me instead of the coronet. And every wall I'd built started crumbling. Crispin, let me finish, please. He took a shaky breath. When Lord Pemberton showed me those letters, I wasn't doubting you. I was terrified that someone in my own household had been watching us, listening to our private moments, using our connection as a weapon. The details they contained, things I'd told you in confidence, things only we knew. It meant someone close had betrayed us both. Who? A footman. One of Lady Narcissa's former servants, who'd obtained a position here specifically to spy for her. He's been arrested. Crispin's hands clenched at his sides. But knowing the truth doesn't excuse what I did. I should have trusted you. I should have fought for you in that moment instead of retreating into my damned control. I should have. You should have. The words came out gentler than she intended. But I also should have given you a chance to explain. Instead, I assumed the worst and fled. You had every right to flee. I gave you no reason to stay. You gave me every reason. She moved closer, finally allowing herself to breach the distance between them. You gave me your father's book. You gave me conversations that meant more than anything I'd experienced in years. You gave me the first kiss that felt real instead of performed. Coralie, I'm not finished. She took his hands, feeling them tremble in her grip. I've spent my entire life being overlooked, being careful, being safe. And then you came along and made me want to be brave, made me want to fight for something instead of just surviving. I was so afraid of getting hurt that I forgot. Sometimes, pain is the price of feeling anything at all. What are you saying? She looked into his eyes, gray as storm clouds, bright with desperate hope, and spoke the truth she'd been denying since the moment they'd met. I love you, against every rational thought, despite every warning I've given myself. I love you, and I'm tired of running from it. He kissed her then, gentle and fierce all at once, his arms wrapping around her like he'd never let go. She tasted salt, his tears or hers, she couldn't tell, and joy so sharp it felt like breaking. I love you too, he murmured against her lips. I've been trying to find words for it since the first moment you forgot I existed. You make me want to be present instead of merely surviving. You make me brave. Then let's be brave together. She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. Whatever comes next, the scandal, your grandmother, society's judgment, we face it together. Together, he agreed. Always. They found the dowager in her sitting room, waiting. She sat in her usual chair, her posture rigid, and her expression unreadable. But something in her eyes had shifted, a softening that Coralie hadn't seen before. So, the dowager said as they entered hand in hand, the prodigal returns. I've asked Miss Whitmore to stay, Crispin said, permanently. Not as a guest, not as a companion to Sibylla, as my future wife. The words hung in the air, heavier than any pronouncement at the bride parade. The dowager rose slowly, her gaze fixed on Coralie. You have no fortune, no title, no connections of significance. Society will never fully accept you, no matter how many scandals Lady Narcissa faces. There will always be whispers. Always be those who believe you climbed above your station through manipulation rather than merit. I know. You know. The dowager moved closer, and yet you stay. Why? Coralie straightened her spine, meeting the older woman's eyes without flinching. Because I love him. Not his title, not his wealth, not the position I might gain by becoming his wife. I love the man who hides in libraries to escape obligations he never wanted, who gave me his father's chair because he couldn't bear to see it empty anymore, who kissed me on a terrace and asked me to pretend, just for a moment, that the impossible might be possible. The dowager's expression flickered, something that might have been recognition or memory. I know I'm not what you wanted for your grandson, Coralie continued, her voice growing stronger. I know I can't give him strategic alliances or increase his fortune or strengthen his political position. But I can give him something those suitable candidates never could. Someone who sees him, not the coronet. Someone who chose him when walking away would have been easier. And you expect me to believe that's enough? That love is enough to sustain a marriage in our world? I expect nothing. Coralie's voice steadied. But I hope. Your son married for love. You opposed it. But by all accounts, he was happy. Truly happy. And when you lost him, what you grieved wasn't his strategic value. It was him. The person. The son you loved despite your disapproval. The silence stretched, sharp enough to cut. Then, unexpectedly, the dowager laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if she'd forgotten how, but genuine nonetheless. "You have spine," she said. "More spine than any of those simpering debutantes I paraded through this house." She turned to Crispin. "She'll be criticized endlessly, scrutinized mercilessly. Some doors will close permanently." "I know. And you still want this?" "More than anything I've ever wanted." The dowager studied her grandson, really studied him, for the first time seeing not the Duke, but the man beneath. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. "Very well." She turned back to Coralie. "I won't pretend to approve entirely. You're still not what I would have chosen. But I've learned that fighting my grandson's choices only drives him further away. And," she paused, something softening in her severe features, "you remind me of someone." "Who?" "His mother." The words came out quietly. "She spoke to me much the same way, all those years ago. Just as bold, just as certain, just as absolutely unsuitable by every measure I valued." The dowager took Coralie's hands, her grip surprisingly warm. "I was wrong about her. Perhaps I'm wrong about you." "Your Grace, Augusta." The correction was firm. "If you're to be family, we dispense with excessive formality in private." Sibylla burst through the door, her face alight with joy. "She said yes?" Without waiting for an answer, she threw her arms around both of them. "This is wonderful. There's so much to do. The dress, the invitations." "Sibylla," Crispin interrupted gently. "Perhaps let Coralie breathe." "Breathing can wait. We have a wedding to plan." Despite everything, Coralie laughed. This impossible family had become hers, not through birth or fortune, but through love, chosen freely. Through courage, hard-won. It was more than she'd ever dreamed. And it was only the beginning. The Montague ball blazed with more candles than even the Thornwood had boasted. Coralie stood at the top of the grand staircase, but everything was different now. The gown she wore was deep blue silk, the color Madame Fontaine had called something special. Diamonds glittered at her throat, real ones this time, a gift from Augusta that had arrived that morning with a note that read simply, "Welcome to the family." Below them, London's finest had gathered not for judgment, but for witness. The scandal of Lady Narcissa's exposure had transformed the narrative completely. Coralie was no longer the suspicious fortune hunter. She was the wronged innocent, the unlikely romantic heroine who'd won a duke's heart against all odds. "Ready?" Crispin asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." He laughed, and the sound drew attention from below. This time, the whispers held wonder rather than judgment. The majordomo announced them, and they descended together. The evening unfolded like a dream. Lords and ladies who'd ignored her now sought her conversation. Women who'd whispered behind fans now offered genuine smiles. When the orchestra began a waltz, Crispin led her to the center of the floor. "I have something to ask you," Crispin said as they turned. "Another question? This one is different." He slowed their movement. "Coralie Whitmore, you fell asleep reading book spines in my library and changed my entire life. You taught me that being overlooked isn't the same as being invisible. That love isn't a weakness. Crispin, will you marry me?" He'd stopped entirely. "Not because of arrangements or expectations. Will you marry me because you love me as terrifyingly and completely as I love you?" 500 of London's most influential people watched, waited. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. 1,000 times. "Yes." He kissed her right there in the center of the Montague ballroom. The applause started somewhere near the back and spread like wildfire. When they finally broke apart, Crispin smiled. "You've just scandalized half of London. Then they can add it to the list." 1 year later, The library at Ravenmore House had been Coralie's favorite room since the first time she'd entered it. Now, sitting in the chair that had once belonged to Crispin's father, she understood why he'd loved it so much. The smell of old paper and polished wood wrapped around her like an embrace. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with thousands of volumes. And the books themselves stood as silent witnesses to a love story that had begun with overlooked moments and grown into something neither of them had dared to imagine. A year of marriage had changed everything and nothing. Crispin still retreated to this room when duty pressed too heavily, but now he retreated with her rather than from her. They'd established their own rituals: morning tea in the conservatory, evening readings by the fire, walks through the gardens. Small moments that added up to a life. Augusta had mellowed considerably, though she still offered pointed observations about proper behavior whenever Coralie breached protocol. But there was warmth beneath the criticism now, a grudging affection that had grown into something genuine. Sibylla had made her debut and was currently being pursued by 3 earls and a viscount, though she seemed more interested in books than suitors, a family trait. Perhaps. Coralie was cataloging the collection, a project she'd undertaken to organize the library's holdings, when she found the letter. It was tucked into a worn volume of Keats, one of his father's favorites, judging by the creased spine. The envelope was addressed in an unfamiliar hand, the paper old, the ink faded. My dearest Henry, if you're reading this, I am already gone. I want you to know, our son carries more of your wisdom than he realizes. When the time comes, he will know how to choose. Trust him. Trust his heart. Love is not a weakness. It is the only thing that makes duty bearable. Your loving father. Coralie's eyes filled with tears. Crispin's grandfather, writing to Crispin's father. Words of wisdom passed down through generations. She was still holding the letter when Crispin found her. What is it? She gave him the letter. He read it slowly, his face moving through emotions. Surprise, grief, joy, peace. He knew, Crispin said quietly. Somehow, he knew what we'd both need to hear. Maybe wisdom isn't something we create. Maybe it's something we discover was always there. He pulled her up from the chair, settling into it himself and drawing her down onto his lap. They sat together in the quiet library, surrounded by books and the ghosts of love that had come before. Thank you, he said finally, for finding this, for finding me. You were never lost. She rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of cedar and sandalwood. You were just overlooked, he laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. And you? Were you overlooked too? By everyone except you. She tilted her face up to meet his eyes. You looked at me when no one else did. You chose me when you could have had anyone. I chose the only person worth choosing. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'd do it all again. Every moment. Because it led here, to us. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. The bride parade, the arrangement, the scandal, the dark night when she'd fled. All of it had shaped who they were. All of it had shaped them into the people they'd become. Outside, the Ravenmore garden stretched toward distant hills, the same view she'd seen from the green guest suite on her first night. Inside, everything had transformed. The overlooked companion had become a duchess. The grieving duke had learned to live again. And love, chosen freely against all odds, had proven stronger than fear. Some stories begin with grand gestures, proposals in ballrooms, declarations before crowds. Theirs had begun with something far simpler. A moment of being overlooked, a choice to see what others had dismissed. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.